As focusing on the 16 blocks, Blacksburg was established in 1798. And the most notable thing about the slide is, back in the early days, the Struble Creek was our water. We used it for drinking, bathing, and washing. And, you can see it winds its way through downtown. And it was really critical to us. And it was an important feature of that because we used it in day-to-day life. So up until the 50s, that was kind of our interaction with Struble Creek. But unfortunately that we grew and that changed.
Side, can you help orient people to maybe a landmark they might know there? And then I'm noticing there's a street, I know the answer to this, but the folks might find it interesting why one of the streets has a different name.
Yes, good question, Carol. Right here is Water Street going on this picture, the bottom of the street to the top. That is current day Draper. So that is right where we are on Main Street. Back in the day when Struble Creek was part of the big line, it was called Water Creek. Because you can see it's where the water flows. And if you think about it, Five Chimneys is right before the creek turns left to go towards campus. You probably wouldn't recognize anywhere else where you see that creek because you can't see it today. But you definitely see the creek right outside of Five Chimneys, and that is a very little bit of what's visual on this side. So, yes.
You can hear the water on Draper Street. If you ride your bike along the where the sewer outlet is, you can actually hear the water.
You can, yeah, you can hear it rushing, especially after a storm. It's pretty loud too. So it's kind of neat. You know it's there, but you can't always see that it's there.
Hey, I'm sorry, but I didn't get the file. You said, can you send it to Carol?
Yeah, send it to me and then I'll send it to Ann and we'll go with it. Pause for technology break.
Luckily, Joe, you pop up.
But eventually they all will be. There are three main tributary rivers here that are tributary to Struble.
That should work. I just saw that.
Okay.
And I may not have been on the Wi-Fi before, so it's possibly why the previous file didn't save. So you may be getting both. Okay, hold on for just a second. Mouse to this.
Probably there was a question in the back of the room about whether the stream at the top was concrete, and I surmised that it was a tributary of Struble's. Was that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, we are a little ways away from Tom's Creek. All of the blue lines in this picture are all Struble's Creek tributaries. So right now we're kind of in the upper watershed of Struble's Creek. So we don't have a main stem yet. The main stem really starts on campus when we have 3 or 4 larger tributaries collect together. So all of these ones were used as water sources, but they were all just minor tributaries. Okay. So now we're looking at Blacksburg closer today. I think this picture was taken maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but it's to give you, to orient you, that original picture was the 16 blocks over here. And the landscape has changed in the last 200 years. In this picture, you can see the creek. It is either a blue line or a black line. The areas where it's a black line means it is tight. So it kind of speaks to the fact that as the town and the area has grown, we no longer need Struble's Creek to drink water and wash our clothes and all of those things we used to do. It has become not so valuable. We don't see it, we don't have the same connection, and we struggle to have the same relationship with the creek that we did back when we used it every day. So this is just kind of an example. There's a black line on the top, that's another tributary. But all of these are areas where we've grown over top of the creek. So, as an example, this is a relatively recent picture of what Sturgill's Creek looks today under downtown. It passes under residential areas, downtown campus. You know, our water quality has deteriorated and we don't see the creek as much an asset, but a burden. It causes flooding, it causes problems. And as you can see, you know, in the photo, it's not a great photo, but it's really dark down there, so it's really hard to get a good photo. It's gross in essence, you know, it's not a place that you'd want your kids to play. Yes.
Where's that?
That is, I'd say under Draper towards the Bolos area. There's a set of stairs down there that from time to time we have to maintain and get access to the creek down there. It's one of the few locations where you can actually see this part. And so it's in that section. Those brick are foundations of buildings that are built right on top of the creek. Because, you know, back when these historic buildings were put in, that's what was happening. That was the building of the time. So a lot of it is just historic, you know, we want to put a building here, the creek's here, it's not where it's in our way, we're just gonna bridge over top, and this is how we're gonna do it. Yes.
What are we seeing for the white?
That white is concrete. So at some point before I started the town, there was concern that the creek was doing some damage to the building foundations downtown. And the town came in and used a product called shotcrete, which is basically like flowable concrete you can kind of spray out of a hose. And they came in and covered the areas that were exposed to dirt with this surface to help keep it from eroding. Because what had happened was, over the decades and decades these buildings have been here, some of those foundations, there was actually a void between the floor of the foundation and the creek. Because creeks move, creeks erode, that is the natural function of a creek. And when you have a creek interacting with the building foundation, it's not the greatest situation. So that was done decades ago, but that's why it looks so smooth. It's rock covered in concrete. Yes.
Is that stable now, or is that, or like, I guess another question I'm asking is that a similar practice that we would employ today, or is that like a, now considered like a bad practice to do it that way?
Good question. Would we do this again today? I don't know. It's functional. It does the job, but it has zero environmental benefit to it. I mean, we're talking about spraying concrete in a creek. That's very nasty. It's not good for the creek. Concrete and the water, the pH is so toxic and high for aquatic species. So I don't think we would do this today. And there are also other legal issues. We don't have, the town doesn't have any easements or any maintenance. Technically, the creek underneath all these buildings are the property of the property owner, of the individual property owner. So, you know, with modern legal issues, we would be a little more concerned about liability. Ultimately, in my opinion, the solution to this, because yes, it will likely occur again, because again, creeks move, erosion happens, it's natural and constant. The long-term solution is to actually put a conveyance through here. That's made to contain the creek. And the town would need to get easements, we would need to hold the maintenance responsibility, we would need to take ownership of this situation for once and for all.
It's a conveyance of pipe.
A pipe or a box, for this to be a box culvert, basically a large square pipe. Big enough to take the flows that are can safely come through here. And take it out effectively. That would most likely be the solution, because we're not gonna daylight the creek, we're not likely to daylight the creek. Especially considering it's under historic buildings, that's just not what we're gonna choose to do that, it's a good idea, it's, that impact would be too great. Most likely to kind of balance the two assets, we would need to convey it safely. And keep the buildings in place, which would have to be some kind of permanent solution that's not erodable. So, and the infrastructure is possible, it's just been working through that, it would be a multi-year fun project. And so far,
Many millions of dollars.
Absolutely. So there's a solution, it's just not anything that we are looking at in the short term. It could be something in the long term could be done. So it just gives you kind of a then and now, and gives a chance understanding of how we're getting close to where we are. So with the growth of Blacksburg, okay with time. With the growth of Blacksburg, we have drainage issues. And the reason why I want to talk about this, because it does lead into why we have flooding and water quality issues. But growth, more people, ends up having more impact to a water source. This is Woodbine subdivision. It just was a good picture of a pretty dirty stream. And, it's just an example of how when you're down to the construction sites, growth comes with growth comes construction. We see sediment laden water that is certainly not desirable. We see more excessive runoff and more erosion. We see more frequent flooding. And as we get away from those early days, even the infrastructure that we have in place is aging. So we're kind of trying to balance all of these competing interests and do the best we can and keeping the improvements happening so that we can address all of these issues.
But that's not an existing stream, right?
That is a drainage channel.
Okay.
It doesn't normally look that big. That is definitely right after a large storm.
Okay.
It's also not normally that brown.
Yes.
So the volume is not unexpected. The color is unwanted. And this is because of construction site runoff upstream. It is why it looks like that.
So the woman who's standing slightly downhill up there, presumably there's a house at the bottom of that driveway, or? There's a-
Luckily, no, that's a trick.
Oh, yes.
I live about 100 feet beyond the end of that picture.
The big house.
You think that was gonna be-
That is a very, very quick
Of course.
and Woodbine, anytime we get a heavy rain.
Absolutely, and we, heard from residents, we go, it's an issue and it's definitely unpleasant. And I say unpleasant, and I don't live there. I'm sure it's even worse for the folks who have to see this all the time. And it's one of those situations that it's hard to resolve when the growth is happening. So it's a good example of some of the negative impacts that was happening last. So we also have even more devastating than that is significant flooding. We have, from time to time, we have intense rainfall and they completely exceed the capacity of what we have in place. And our existing pipes are overrun. So we end up getting flooding like here. This is along Webb Street at Tech Terrace. If you're wondering, yes, that water is in those apartments on the left. And it happens so often that the owners of that building don't even rent those apartments anymore because they got flooded so often. So it is as bad as it looks. And so there are a number of areas in town where growth has mean more volume of water, and it means, and we're seeing impacts similar to this.
When is that air constructed, you know?
I don't actually, it's not as,
Like 90s,
does anybody know in the audience? I think it's early 90s or early 00s. So over 20 years ago, but I'm not sure exactly. It's near Kevin. It is protected across the street. What's a good landmark over there? It's not an apartment.
It's the new Jordan construction, BW3s.
The tall thing, yeah, the tall building is right across the street from this. So,
Roundabout.
off of Preston.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so it's right behind ABA Garden Complex on that little street that is right off of Price's Fork. It has a one-way out, and you can only turn right on the Price's Fork from West Street. All right. So in addition to flooding and construction, we also have aging infrastructure. This is a pipe that failed 2 years ago under tall oaks. And made the entire road unpassable for almost a year. It was a very large pipe, but it was also very old, and it just collapsed. And, you know, it was an inconvenience to the folks who live there, but we were happy that nobody was hurt, no structures were in the way. You know, it's never ideal to have infrastructure failures. But it all is a relief just to know that everyone is safe and there's no danger for life and limb in these types of things. Because they look terrible, and they're quite a disruption to the folks who had to drive a complete different direction than they normally would, when they would normally just take this normally functional intersection. So these are all the things that happen with growth, and you know, are things that we need to look at, and the town looks at all of these things and tries to address them as they come. It's okay. So this is just this slide is talking about water quality in Blacksburg. So like I mentioned, when rain falls, it is an impervious surface, just like a roof or things like that, but rainfall that goes on these impervious surfaces picks up all kinds of pollutants. It mobilizes them, all kinds of stuff like animal waste and chemicals and pesticides and trash, just all kinds of nasties. As you can see, this creek is also Web Street, which is not intentional. It just happened to be another great photo. The creek had turned white that day. And we had determined that it was paint that had gotten into the creek. And you know how anyone who's painted white anything, it takes forever to get that water out, the white color out of the brushes that you're using. If you can only imagine how that looks in the creek, it's terrible. And so we're dealing with the challenges of people putting things into the creek that are improper, and you know, it does take a toll on the whole system. Like everything living in that creek is impacted by that paint. And it's not just, you know, we can get away from it, those critters can't. So it does take a toll on them when it comes down to the repeated human exposure from what we do and the creatures that live along the stream bank. So speaking of water quality, and I promise this won't be so depressing, the last part of the presentation is more positive. Water quality in this area is not great. Every single one of our creeks is impaired, and the impairment terminology is a state description that says it's not meeting the intended use. So it means there are contributions to that creek that are not good. And as you can kind of see in that chart on the right, it's not unusual when areas get developed. The water quality always goes down. So in this chart, I don't know if it's easy to see, but I'll go over broad brush. In this blue column where the water quality is good, we have lots of sensitive areas in the watershed. That's less than 10% impervious cover over its watershed. So you've got grass, trees, woods, you can have a non-impervious areas buffer from the impervious areas. They can kind of heal itself from the impacts of paved surfaces. But as you go down to over 60%, the water quality clearly goes down. The colors turning to gray is representative of the water quality of areas that have more and more urban drainage. And while Blacksburg is a pocket in Southwest Virginia, there's lots of beautiful streams outside of our jurisdiction because we are so densely populated, because we are so developed. We're definitely not in the blue area, and it's not unique to us, is really what I'm trying to say. It is very common for little areas to be like this, and it doesn't mean you like it or you want it to stay that way. It's just, this is how we got here, but we would really like to get closer to that blue. Anywhere closer is better. So we have a host of challenges. Specifically, these are the impairments of each of our watersheds in town. We have 3 major watersheds. Strubles Creek is impaired for sediment and bacteria. Cedar Run and Wilson Creek, and those areas are kind of, we'll say, the east side of town, from Maple Ridge down to Highland Park. If anyone knows those neighborhoods, they kind of shed down towards Elk Valley. That's the Cedar Run, Wilson Creek, and the North Fork of the Roanoke River watershed. They have different issues, but it's also similar, like the PCBs, bacteria, and sediment. And then Tom's Creek, that we're familiar with, there's more of the northwest side of town. It's temperature and bacteria. So each of the areas have different characteristics, and each of them have different impairments. Yes.
Do you know the general source of I think sediment is probably a relatively obvious one, and bacteria, but PCBs, is that some sort of legacy contaminant from some prior activity on the land?
Good question. So PCBs are, they're a lot less easy to pin down. Polychlorinated biphenyls is what PCBs stand for, and a lot of them are chemicals that are man-made. They are used in a host of things like transformers and hydraulic fluid and yellow paint and all kinds of things. A lot of times, if you needed something to be heat resistant, you would use PCBs, but they've held up under all kinds of conditions that you hit it with. The problem is, back in the 70s, they realized that these things were carcinogenic, and not only did they hold up for heat, they did not break down at all. So PCBs are pretty nasty chemicals where, because they don't break down naturally at all, fish consume them, and then it becomes a health hazard to humans that then consume the fish, because those PCBs, if you eat something with PCBs in it, then you then have PCBs inside your body. And it's one of those crazy things that, only we could create, that are so good at not breaking down They just don't go away. So PCBs were banned in the 1970s to the levels that were being used at that time. We still allow very small, minute PCBs to be used to this day, but they're much, much less. And they are so persistent in our waterways that we're gonna be cleaning these things up for until the cows. So those are the ones that most folks are less aware of. So it's kind of in the stormwater world, we know what PCBs are, but out in day-to-day, it's not something to talk about. We do see a lot of bacteria and sediment in our waterways as well. And that, to me, from a outreach perspective, is a little easier to communicate what people can do about bacteria and sediment. Like, we're not gonna have any household remedies for people, but we certainly can help with bacteria and sediment and our daily lives. So those will, industry and localities will have to really hit on those PCBs harder than the average Joe. Yes.
What is causing the temperature rise on the street?
Sure. Lack of forest cover, lack of tree cover, and urban drainage. So those two are the most common causes for higher temperatures. Concrete is characterized as a shotcrete. So it's originally expected to have the temperature that's low enough to keep a permanent stand of trout year round. It does not. Right now it's stopped in areas. And a lot of it is agriculture, does a lot of tree removal for grazing of animals and for like fields of hay. Also mix that with some of the developed areas that drain to the concrete. We've got some huge apartment complexes that have huge roofs and huge parking lots that were all developed before there were any stormwater management requirements. That water is hot and it shoots straight to the creek. And then once it gets there, there's nothing out there to cool it off. So it's really a tough battle because, we're dealing with things that happened decades ago and trying to rein a little bit of it in, little by little. But that is the source of the temperature issue for sure. Yeah.
Have there ever been any soil surveys or studies for the PCBs in any of the waterways to try to track down the point sources?
Not, and I'm aware of in Blacksburg. The PCB impairment is for a large watershed, along the Mississippi River. And also the Roanoke, both of them. Well, the Roanoke is the one listed up here. We're not sure exactly where the sources are. They have looked at that what's the word I'm looking for? Obvious industries that they know test, and those are mostly downstream of us. So there has been some soil sampling just on Blacksburg, because there aren't any like red flags or sources in Blacksburg that are still active to be like, oh, let's test there. There's very rarely enough money to test the whole watershed to look for unknown sources. Usually they're like, we think it could be this. It's higher probability, let's test and confirm. That way they can be a little more targeted with their funds, because it's expensive to test and it's a lot of area, and they don't want to just throw a dart at an area. They want to have an expectation that that's going to give you good information. So at this point, there haven't been any tests I'm aware of Blacksburg, but the fish that they have found with PCB are here. So where they're coming from is, we have it somewhere. And, if you think about the potential for transformers, a lot of the electric companies are really looking into upgrading their transformers. How many power poles do you have transformers, and how old are these transformers? They all have PCB. It could be a little bit everywhere instead of like one industry that's dumping it off to the system.
And what about corrosive, like piping underground? would that cause a PCB running on top?
Not that I'm aware of, like, I just managed to my corrugated metal trees, stuff that you normally have to ground. I haven't heard of any, like, between that, I can't say definitively, but I've been to several hundreds, it feels like, of informational sessions about PCBs, and I've never heard of the typing of like rusting pipes, because, you know, we do see rusting pipes, but they haven't seen a link to PCBs. Any other questions before I go on to the next slide? Okay. All right. So I'm gonna breeze through the next few slides just because I kind of talked about a lot of this stuff. What's the town doing? Because we have all these issues. We have a whole host of capital projects that we have done and that we're continuing to do that we're trying to put in some urban fire retention, which you can see on College Avenue. And that helps areas that never had stormwater management. It helps capture some of that water. We have in the plan to do several stream restoration projects, and that'll help reduce some of that erosion along the streams that we're looking at. Having plans where we can to put in porous surfaces when we would normally historically done something impervious is always good. So we try to put in porous surfaces whenever we can that's suitable for the site. And we hold stream and stormwater education events like this one today. We also do ones for school kids and like K-12. We do events for tech students, and we volunteer our time to do it for all kinds of community groups that are interested in stormwater. We will talk to anybody if they want to listen. So that's from our side. We also developed our stormwater utility fee. This is probably the most boring slide on our thing, but if they guys live in town and pay the stormwater fee, having all of those hurdles to have to jump, this is what we use that fee for. Maintenance, improvements, compliance, monitoring, inspection, education, planning, and reporting. So it just gives you a little bit of context if you're ever wondering, you see that $6 fee on your bill, like, where does it really go to? It goes to a whole host of things that we're trying to combat some of this historic issues with. So if it helps to pay it, then at least it's going to something good. So I mentioned a few times about legacy issues and stormwater regulations. Stormwater, our regulations are constantly changing. Development's regulations are constantly changing. It starts with the Clean Water Act from 1972. It goes through the state, through DEQ. They regulate our program. And Virginia is a Dillon Rule state, so I don't want to go into detail about what a Dillon Rule state means, except that we are required to do what the state tells us to do. We have very little ability to branch out and do something new when it comes to our code and regulation. We can't be too creative because the way that Virginia is set up is it's, very, I won't say heavy-handed, but it's very restrictive on you. This is the code that you must follow. You cannot venture too far off of this standard because this is the standard we expect.
A higher standard than state, essentially.
Sometimes. They do say if you want to have a higher standard, you can, but their definition of higher often depends on the administrator. So it becomes a struggle either way. You'll find a lot of localities where they just stick to the state code because it's the easiest to justify and defend. The town does have several regulations that are higher than the states. Our requirement for stormwater management is hits at a smaller threshold. So because Blacksburg is a small community with relatively small development sites, if we were to go to the state threshold, very little of our development would have to be in stormwater. So we kind of restrict ours down to an appropriate development site size for the town. So a lot of counties who have large developments, they stick to the state standard, but we push really hard to keep our more stringent standard because I think it really helps our water quality not getting worse. So that just gives you a little bit of an umbrella of where we come from regulations. So now to the positive half of the presentation, what can you do to help? So stormwater management is constantly changing, so keeping learning, like today, is always at the top of every one of my lists, because even I learn new things at presentations that I go to. There's new technologies that are coming out, and there's new information about sources, like maybe we found some other linked PCBs that we didn't know were there before. That would help us to be able to have different tools to address these things. So keeping learning, doing as much as you can with local groups and keeping it on your radar is always a big way to help overall. Because if you're aware of it, then one is less likely to fall into a bad habit if you're thinking about our water quality. I always recommend, if you can, install a rain barrel or rain garden, using sustainable landscaping methods, notifying us if you see improper behavior, and trying to use good housekeeping habits in general. And I'm going to go through each of these in depth. So I'm glossing over this just because I have a slide for each. Okay. So keeping learning, basically this presentation was supported by Sustainable Blacksburg. So they get to be at the top of my list of examples. But there are also a ton of other groups in town that have other outreach and activities. They do events for education, they do stream cleanups, they do litter pickups. All of these things help our water quality. And these are just a few examples that I work with personally, but I also hear about new ones all the time. So this is not an exhaustive list, but if you're looking out, a lot of local groups have some kind of environmental water quality kind of group. Even if it's like bird watching, they're folks that it's easy to link any kind of these natural organizations to the health of our water and our watershed. So stay involved, and that's the least, that's one of the easiest things that can be done to actually help water quality. You can also install a rain barrel at your home. This picture is probably the prettiest rain barrel you've ever seen. They usually don't look that good, but it was perfect for a PowerPoint presentation. Rain barrels are fantastic because our roofs are a huge source of all that volume of water, one of the impacts of development. And so it would capture our roof water. It would help reduce runoff, erosion, flooding, even sewer backups. This presentation isn't about sewer, but along with flooding, sewer backups is a huge side effect of flooding. And we've talked about the pollutants that can get in surface water, but sewer backups is an impact like none other. It's basically what happens is why they connect to flooding is rainwater that overwhelms the rainwater system, then gets into the sewer. And then it overwhelms the sewer system. And then you have sewer water mixed with rainwater. And that's just a whole world of terrible. So anything we can do that would help reduce that from occurring is fantastic. A rain barrel will also help you save money on your water bill. You got a garden, you got some landscaping, you can use your rain barrel to use that, and that's free water. And it's the exact kind of water that your plants love, not all that chlorinated mess that we drink. So the New River Valley Master Gardeners Association, they regularly host rain barrel workshops every year. I have a contact there. If anyone is interested, I can get your information and send it over to them. There's a fee You basically pay for the barrel and you can put it together and you can paint it and make it your own. I have one at my house that I love. So it's a real great avenue if you want to get started with something like that. You can also purchase one from Home Depot or Lowe's. Those are definitely already put together, which is nice, but they're a lot more expensive. Like 3 times more expensive. So, but it's an option. If you wanna skip all the like, DIY part, you can just go straight to Home Depot and get you a rain barrel. They don't always have them in stock, but they can ship to the store. And it doesn't cost you any money to ship to the store. So you have lots of options if you're interested in capturing your runoff in a rain barrel. Okay. Also, you can install a rain garden. Rain gardens are basically low areas on your property. You can take advantage of existing low areas or create one. It's vegetated. It is built in a way, often with a layer of very infiltrate loose soil, so water can get into the ground. They've also reduced runoff, they absorb nutrients, and they also recharge our groundwater sources, so that's also a nice benefit. I have one caveat, just because we are in Blacksburg, that I do not recommend rain gardens for karst areas. There's a handful, more than a handful, it's a lot of town that is in karst areas, it's means a lot of bedrock. And when you have a karst area with a ton of bedrock, there isn't a ton of that filtering soil before you get into the water sources. It just goes straight down. And so depending on where you are, if you had sinkholes or any history of kind of karst features, I would certainly not want to put a rain garden in any kind of karst feature. And they're settled around town, so it's enough that I would certainly want to make sure you're not subjecting to that. But when you have a good amount of soil and you just have a low area that you want to direct your root drains to, it's a great method of making that stormwater work for the environment instead of just running off into our system. Yes.
I was just gonna comment that folks are curious whether or not they're in your property as a karst on it. I believe the town's comprehensive plan has a karst map in one of the chapters.
It does.
I don't know which, is it environment chapter?
I think it's,
Yeah.
Um,
It's either for environment.
yes. And if you are curious and you look at the comprehensive plan and it's unclear, it's the town wide map, so it's hard to see where you are, I can always, you'll have my information and I can always give you any information I have. Because we keep, try to keep record of every time we see any kind of karst. Only because if areas develop, it really impacts how they develop or how they handle the stormwater. So I can provide more information if that map and the comprehensive plan isn't detailed enough for you. Okay. So in addition to rain gardens and barrels, you could always use sustainable landscaping methods. And I want to stress that with sustainable landscaping methods, one size does not fit all. Please try to use choices that fit your circumstances. Sustainable landscaping is a pretty blanket term. I mean, it could be as simple as just not over applying fertilizer and nutrients to your lawn. I know that some folks feel very strongly about turf versus more native ground covers. To me, if you are, if you want to have turf yard, there's a sustainable way to have turf. And there's a sustainable way to have more native grasses. So my goal is for everyone to do the best they can in their circumstance with sustainable landscaping. But one thing to be aware of, it's good for people to be aware of the difference between invasives and natives. And I know there was a presentation prior about that. So whoever went to that would probably be more of an expert than I am about invasives and natives. But broad brush, they interact very differently with local habitat than, invasives don't interact with habitat like natives. And it's not just limited to their growth, their water usage is different, the kind of bugs that thrive on them are different. So if people are just aware of invasives versus natives and they're purchasing, they can make more knowledgeable purchases. I'm not trying to tell anybody what to put in their yard, but a lot of times people don't know. So they make choices based on the lack of knowledge. So the more knowledge, the better. And I also think that it's important to stress to select landscaping suitable for your home and your property. Water loving plants in wet areas. A lot of folks try to put a square peg in a round hole with landscaping. They end up wasting water. They end up losing the plant or tree ultimately. And a lot of times if we do a soil test, we can find something that's best suited for that area. And it takes less of an impact of just that because the choice of landscaping is just better suited. We're not trying to force something that doesn't really want to live there. So, shady plants, shady areas, all those things, try to be as aware as you can as to pick things that are just more suitable for your wooded lot or your non-wooded lot. So it's a wide options, but I think if we all know more, we'll make better choices. All right, so this is my plug for you all to let us know when you see something that you think shouldn't be happening. And the picture here is kind of a joke, but not. So we really do want our citizens to be empowered to call us or notify someone if they see something that's improper. We have a various staff, we can't see everything, but we really do want to make sure that if anyone sees dumping or chemical or people putting chemicals or that paint in the creek, let us know. And we will try to address it as soon as we can. And a lot of times people just aren't educated. They don't understand. They don't understand that the storm drain does not go to the sanitary sewer system. That's one of the biggest miscommunications, just misconceptions. Thank you. People think if it goes into a pipe, it gets treated, and people don't always know that the water that goes into a storm drain is expected to be the stormwater, and so it goes straight to our creeks. And sometimes just letting people know, no, that doesn't get treated. You're just dumping it into the creek in the backyard. It helps them not. It helps change their behavior in a gentle way. So educate people around you about pet waste. We do find that that's an easy way to reduce that whole bacteria impairment that we have on a lot of our creeks. Picking up after pets and disposing of the pet waste properly is pretty straightforward. Just get people in the habit. And I talked about this a little bit, but just be patient with people who don't fully understand the system. I find that those who are learning get really put off by being told off. And so we almost end up like creating people who do bad things just to spite us when we're a little too heavy-handed. So let's all just be gentle and share instead of shaming. And that way we can bring everyone along at their own pace to a better knowledge and understanding of how we interact with our watershed and our environment. So this is my last slide. Just a couple other good habits to recommend. Never dump anything down a storm drain. I don't even put sodas in the storm drain because I just think about those poor frogs and stuff down there. What they're gonna think of Diet Coke, they probably won't like it. But anything that you can do to prevent anything going down the storm drain that's not proper is good. Like addressing leaking cars and any yard equipment or farm equipment quickly. Try not to litter. Downspouts, let them infiltrate if possible and if appropriate. You know, we've got some communities in town that are super dense. And I wish we could get everyone to infiltrate their downspouts, but some of our more dense communities, all it's doing is going into someone else's foundation. So if you have the room, please allow your downspouts to infiltrate. If you don't, you know, we'll find other ways to protect our waterways. Well, a lot of downspouts are piped out to the storm drain. And so your roof runoff goes into the pipe and goes into the storm drain, and it speeds up and it never gets to go back in the ground. So if you see the one with a little splash block at the bottom, that allows it to go into the grass, and it just feeds the grass and it infiltrates the soil, and it has more of an opportunity to recharge instead of being piped out to the creek and just adding to that flooding somewhere else. So if we can let our water absorb at the source, that's the best case scenario. But if, you know, you're in an area where it's pavement, and there's just no grass, not enough grass, it's gonna have to go, it's gonna have to leave the site. Always vegetate bare spots in your yard with suitable ground cover. My husband laughs at me every time I go to Home Depot and I go straight to the ground cover section and I check out what they have, and we have a very hilly lots, as many people in this area do, and I'm always looking for the right ground cover, because bare spots in my yard, because I do this presentation so much, they drive me crazy. And so I'm like, well, maybe this ground cover will do it. And so those are always good, even if the ground cover is shredded mulch. I mean, it's better than bare soil. Ideally, you get ground cover that is native and is more suited to this area, but you know, do whatever is appropriate for your site. And composting is great because it adds all that, you know, you have less waste and more great nutrients to add to your garden or your landscape beds. So that concludes my formal presentation, but I'll take any questions that we haven't talked about yet. I know we're right at 1 o'clock, so if anyone has a speech, I will not be offended. Yes, Madam.
Yes, do you have, any suggestions, for dealing with extreme rainfall events, like getting 11 inches of rainfall in 24 hours, which is happening now in places? And what does that do to our stormwater system?
Well, it's not good. We are, so from a homeowner perspective, I would say there isn't a lot can do, except for doing more of these good practices, because 11 inches of rain is a ton, and you know, that's more than, it's more than any rain garden can handle. So from a municipality standpoint, we're looking at being more resilient when it comes to the climate change and more increased rainfall events, and we're obviously seeing it now. Our rain never gets rain, it's always either really dry or really wet. So we're trying to provide some flexibility in our system so that we make infrastructure improvements is designed for the future. That's a slow process. So it's a challenge that luckily I think the conversation is being had and people are aware of it. So decisions are being made. Every project that we look at, how can we make it a little more resilient for them. So not an easy answer, not a simple answer, but awareness, planning, and just, you know, trying to be flexible for those types of things in the future.
I have 2 questions, one more personal, so I'll say that. But the first one is, so some types of developments put more stress on the stormwater system than others, like really dense housing, which is also really important, especially if we're talking about affordable housing. So I'm not trying to like diss that. But in terms of like the developers who are making a lot of money off of these dense developments, are they maybe paying bigger fees to the town to help take care of that disproportionate stress on the stormwater system? Because the downspouts go straight into the system versus being able to be absorbed?
So, a little. The new developments are all required to do the newest iteration of stormwater management, which is something. I mean, yes, all developments, all kinds, stress our water quality. The dense ones can't, it's just level, sliding scale. So the new ones, they don't pay a higher fee because they do put in stormwater management. They've got ponds and underground chambers that are actually, those requirements we get from EPA, they're actually required to treat that volume on site and let it release at a lower rate. So part of the development cost is that increased cost of dealing with it. The old developments that, using a good example, like University Mall. I was using everybody knows about it. It was developed before any stormwater management, and it is nothing but a sea of pavement. They pay because they're the stormwater utility, they pay for every square foot of impervious to put on site. New developments get up to 50% credit because they have their own stormwater management. Those old developments don't get any kind of discount because they aren't doing really anything. So there is a financial incentive. It probably isn't enough, because when it comes to the revenue that these developments make, our stormwater fee is a drop in the bucket. I know that it was intended to be, at rezoning, someone's coming in and wants to put it as intense development, and we tell them up front, your stormwater utility fees are this. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
There's no reconsidering their site design. We really had this vision that we were like, ooh, that's a lot of our fee. Let's reduce our pavement. Let's put in some permeate. They look at the monthly revenue they're getting and they're like, okay, that's right. And so that part is harder to deal with because you always think the monetary incentive is what works, but we're just not charging enough.
Really big change.
I know, and that is probably what needs to happen.
It'll directly increase the cost of living because they will directly.
They'll just pass it on to other landers. So, yeah, there is a big point because a lot of these developers, they don't pay fee, their residents pay the fee. Good example, we had to charge a stormwater fee to a large trailer home community. And it was the bill was sent to the management company, and they doubled what we charged them and pushed that off on each of the homes. So we had folks coming in and saying, why am I paying this much? Why am I paying more than a single family home? And I'm like, oh my God, you should know that what we're charging the management company and the management company was charging them. They were making money off of that. So we can't control that. It's despicable, it's completely despicable. And so we can't control how people do business. But yes, it is tough, especially when they can pass the cost.
Just a suggestion, you could start to mandate, you have to have a certain percentage of pervious, roadways or parking spaces or whatever you want to call it, for each site development going forward.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. It would be nice to have like that chart where, the higher impervious with more, we could keep it to say 50% or 40% impervious. That would be really nice.
And a lot of these, Eaton Island areas, like you're talking about at University City Mall, and over here on, Main Street, I forget the name of it, across, Kroger. But they're just open islands of asphalt. So there's not a lot of, so when I think about pervious pavement, you're talking about load from a vehicle, so there's not a lot of tractor trailers or dump trucks or anything that's heavy that's going over them.
Yeah.
Like if they were were to redevelop those sites to have pervious pavements, like, that's a large chunk
Yeah.
of parking space.
And they're never
full.
They're never.
Yeah.
We know, never. So, absolutely, good stuff. Absolutely. Any other, do you have a second question? We do have one in the back.
I was just wondering, you're talking about some of the requirements, are those some of the things you can't require that one?
I don't know. That's an excellent question, and I don't know the answer to that. Our planners who do the lot coverage calculation, they would probably know more if that's something that's restricted. Because that's really a way to have a stormwater benefit through an avenue that's not a stormwater ordinance. It's really through zoning and lot coverage. So I'll look into it, but I'm not sure if we can't do it or if we just.
And if the Sugar Street is impaired,
Mhm.
I know in Christiansburg, like the Crab Creek Initiative, there's government grants that can be applied for to someone that's up.
Sure thing, and we have used grants in the past, especially for projects. Those are a lot more straightforward to get funded, but yes, we try to go after whatever comes in.
To be respectful of people's time, I think we should wrap this up and ask your question later.
Yes.
My name is Brenda Springer, I'm the treasurer of Sustainable Blacksburg, and I wanted to say thank you so much, Abby.
Thank you.
And here is a gift certificate to Blacksburg Books, as a little thank you for, yes, wonderful sustainable
Yes,
business here in Blacksburg.
exactly, well, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, this is last question, I think.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh,
So good.
anytime.
I'm so glad I came. So the question I have, I'm thinking of my lot, which, you know,